His name was Jamal Thompson, 36 years old, construction engineer out of Atlanta, Georgia. He built things for a living: reinforced concrete, steel beams, foundations engineered to hold weight that would crush most men. He believed in permanence. He believed in doing the work right, the first time, every time. For 8 years, he believed in his marriage. Then one Tuesday evening in April, his wife sat across from him at the most expensive rooftop restaurant in Atlanta, wearing a red dress she hadn't worn for him in 2 years, and calmly asked if she could spend the night with her ex-boyfriend. She already had a bag packed. What she didn't know, what she could not have known, was that Jamal had already spent 72 hours preparing for exactly this moment. The restaurant was Ponce City Kitchen, perched on the rooftop of Ponce City Market on North Highland Avenue. Candlelight flickered off white tablecloths. The Atlanta skyline stretched wide and glittering behind the glass railing. On a different night, in a different life, it might have felt romantic. Jamal had made the reservation 3 weeks earlier. He was going to tell her he loved her. He was going to order the good champagne. Instead, he sat watching his wife of 8 years glance at her phone every 40 seconds, smirking softly at messages she kept tilted just out of his line of sight. The black leather overnight bag beneath her chair caught his eye the moment he sat down. Fully zipped, neatly packed. The kind of packed that doesn't happen in a hurry. "You waiting on somebody?" he asked, keeping his voice easy. Keisha set her phone face down on the tablecloth and looked at him with those dark eyes he had memorized across 8 years. Every mood, every flicker, every meaning behind them. The look she gave him right then was one he had never seen before. It wasn't guilt. It was entitlement. "Jamal," she said, plain as ordering dessert, "I need one night. I have to see Darius, my ex. Just one night." The table between them seemed to widen. His chest tightened the way it does when a structural calculation comes back wrong. That cold, instant recognition that something is about to collapse and cannot be stopped with bare hands. Darius Washington, 38 years old, real estate entrepreneur. Gold watches, tailored suits, and a smile that consumed an entire room. He had been Jamal's best friend in college, his best friend, before the money changed him, before Jamal slowly understood that the man he once called a brother had never truly valued anything he hadn't purchased. Jamal set his fork down. He did not cry. He did not raise his voice. The waiter came by, and he paid the bill, $240 for a dinner he barely touched. And he drove Keisha home to the 2-story Craftsman house in Atlanta's West End neighborhood that they had built their life inside of, together, over 8 years. The moment they stepped through the front door, she picked up that black bag and headed straight back out. "Don't make this a big deal, Jamal. I just need one night to think," she said. The door clicked shut behind her. Jamal stood alone in the living room. The overhead light buzzed softly. On the mantel, a framed photo from their wedding day watched him from across the room. Keisha laughing, her head thrown back, his hand at her waist. They looked genuinely happy. He was genuinely happy, back then. Something made him walk upstairs and open her closet. Half of it was empty, not just clothes. The cedar jewelry box her grandmother had left her, gone. The leather photo album from their honeymoon in Savannah, gone. Personal things, meaningful things, the kind of things a person takes when they do not plan to come back. He sat down on the edge of their bed, the one he had slept in alone more nights than he wanted to count, while Keisha stayed up in the living room with her phone tilted away from the doorway. And everything he had refused to see for months came into sharp, terrible focus. Keisha had not just betrayed him. She had looked down on him so completely, had been so certain he would never truly leave, that she packed her bag, put on that red dress, and walked out the front door without a single moment of hesitation. She expected him to be there when she came back, like furniture, like a fixture of the house itself. Jamal sat with that thought for a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the kitchen table, and opened his laptop, and began building the kind of foundation she never saw coming. She packed that bag before she even sat down to dinner. Type 1 if Jamal should have fought for his marriage. Type 2 if it was already over the moment she walked out. Or drop your story below. We're listening. What Jamal found inside those financial records is going to change everything. Stay with me. He did not scream. He did not chase her car down Oglethorpe Avenue into the night. He did what he always did when something in the structure was wrong. He got quiet. He got methodical. And then he got to work. He opened the joint banking app first, then the family cloud account they had shared since Marcus was born. Photos, receipts, digital records, everything linked together the way it is in a household that has nothing to hide. At least, that was what he had believed. What he found over the next 3 hours was meticulous. Transfers that looked, taken individually, like ordinary household expenses. A few $100s here, a few thousand there, labeled as groceries, home repairs, subscriptions. But when Jamal lined them up chronologically, the way he lined up materials estimates on a job site, the pattern became undeniable. $65,000. 5 months. Gone. Every transaction, followed carefully, pointed back to one name: Darius Washington. Luxury hotels in Buckhead and Midtown, dinners at Bones Restaurant on Piedmont Road, flights to Miami and New York, designer purchases at Phipps Plaza. Every dollar filtered through Keisha's personal accounts, then forward into his. The man he once called his closest friend. Jamal sat back from the screen. There is a kind of pain that does not announce itself with noise. It arrives slowly, the way water seeps into a foundation, quiet, patient, invisible. By the time you finally feel it, the damage is already done. That was the pain that settled into Jamal's chest that night, sitting alone at his kitchen table at 2 a.m, with a spreadsheet full of his wife's choices glowing in front of him. A memory surfaced, uninvited. 6 years earlier. Grady Memorial Hospital on Jesse Hill Jr. Drive. Their son Marcus had been born 11 weeks premature, 3 pounds, 2 ounces. Jamal had stood beside Keisha's bed, her hand in his, watching nurses move quietly around their son like they were protecting something irreplaceable. Keisha had looked up at him, crying so hard she could barely speak, and whispered, "You're the best man I've ever had, Jamal. I don't know what I'd do without you." He had believed her with his whole chest. Now, 6 years later, the same woman had spent their son's future on hotel rooms and gifts for someone else. He sat with that, really sat with it. "I saw the late-night texts," he admitted to himself, quietly, in that empty kitchen. "I noticed the nights she came home after 11, smelling like a restaurant I'd never been invited to. I told myself I was holding the family together. What I was really doing was looking away, because I was afraid of what looking directly would cost me." He picked up his phone and called Tyrone Brooks. Ty arrived within 30 minutes, still in work clothes, a gas station coffee in each hand, looking like a man who had already suspected why the call was coming. "Talk to me," he said simply. Jamal laid out everything: the transfers, the receipts, the cloud records, all of it. When he finished, Ty let the silence sit for a moment before speaking. "So my wife," Ty said carefully, repeating the words back like he was making sure he had heard them right, "has been moving $65,000 into Darius's accounts for 5 months while living in your house." "That's what the records show," Jamal said. Ty listened without interrupting until the last word landed. Then he set his coffee down, rubbed the back of his neck, and spoke with the careful deliberateness of someone releasing information he had been holding back for too long. Jamal, Darius has been talking. At cookouts, at networking events all over the West Side, running his mouth about how Keisha finally made the right choice, saying she was wasted on a man who only knew how to work. Each word landed separately, not because it damaged his pride, because it confirmed that people who had eaten at his table, held his son, sat beside him at church on Sunday mornings. They had known what was happening inside his marriage before he let himself admit it. That was the moment grief ended and clarity began. Jamal worked through the rest of the night. He backed up every message, every receipt, every photograph from the family cloud onto 2 encrypted drives. He reached out to a financial forensics consultant he had worked with on a workplace fraud case 2 years prior. By 4 in the morning, he had moved his independent savings, everything earned under his name alone, into a separate account Keisha had no access to. Then he removed his wedding ring. He held it in his palm for a moment, a plain gold band, nothing elaborate. He had once promised Keisha something more impressive on their 10th anniversary. They were not going to make it to 10. He set the ring on the kitchen counter beside a handwritten note, written on a sheet torn from Marcus's homework pad. You needed one night with him. I gave you a lifetime to regret it. He picked up his go bag, packed before she got home, because somewhere in his gut, he had known this night was coming, and walked out the door at 2:47 in the morning. He moved into a furnished apartment in Smyrna, just off South Cobb Drive. Clean, quiet, anonymous. The kind of place a man rents when he is rebuilding himself and does not need anyone to find him yet. Keisha's messages started before he even reached the highway. They followed a predictable progression. Sharp and indignant at first, then emotional, then increasingly desperate. Then a series of threats she likely regretted sending the moment the anger cooled. Jamal did not respond to any of them. Around midnight, his mother called. Mama Gloria's voice always carries warmth, even when she is in pain. Warm cornbread and Sunday mornings, no matter the hour. That night, the pain was right at the surface. Baby, she said quietly, Keisha has been talking to me for months. I didn't know how to bring it to you. She said you were boring. Said Darius gave her something you couldn't. Jamal was quiet for a long moment. Then, Mama, his wife, the woman Darius bragged about choosing him. She's the same woman who held my hand in that hospital room when Marcus couldn't breathe on his own. I need you to understand that. This isn't just betrayal. This is someone I built a life with. The word boring settled into his chest like a splinter. 12-hour workdays, coaching Marcus's Little League team, Sunday dinners because Keisha said cooking wore her out. The plumbing he fixed himself instead of hiring someone so they could save the money. Every school event, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday showing up without being asked. Boring, because he paid the electric bill and came home every night. But he held himself steady. I know, Mama, he said. Go get some rest. I'm going to be all right. He meant it, because Keisha Thompson had made one critical error in all of this. She had confused his patience with passivity. She believed that because he had absorbed everything quietly, he would absorb anything indefinitely. She had mistaken his choice to stay for an inability to leave. She was about to learn the difference, quietly, legally, and permanently. What happened 3 days later, when Jamal finally agreed to meet Keisha face-to-face, would leave her shaking. And it would mark the last time she ever looked at him the same way again. On the 4th day, Keisha sent a message that was different from everything that had come before it. No anger, no demands, just 6 words. Can we please just Talk. Please. A therapist watching from the outside would recognize this shift immediately. It has a name: reactive attachment. When someone who has been emotionally avoidant suddenly confronts real loss, not the concept of it, but the lived, concrete reality of an empty house and an unanswered phone, the nervous system sounds an alarm. The person who was cold becomes desperate. The one who pushed you away reaches back. Not because they have changed, because they are frightened. Jamal recognized it too, not with clinical language, with the quiet, bone-deep instinct of a man who had spent 8 years learning to read one woman's emotional weather. He agreed to meet her, not because he was wavering, because he understood that some conversations have to happen in person in order to be truly final. He chose Joystick Game Bar on Edgewood Avenue in Old Fourth Ward, a place from their early years: pinball machines, low lighting, the close, comfortable smell of old wood and cold drinks. He'd chosen it with purpose. Familiarity lowers a person's guard. Keisha would walk through that door and feel, briefly, like the woman she used to be, before resentment and comparison had become her default setting. She would arrive slightly softer than she intended. He arrived first, ordered water, sat with his back to the wall. She came through the door 7 minutes late. She looked hollowed out, makeup applied carefully over eyes that had not slept, wearing a blouse he recognized from years of date nights when she wanted him to notice her. Standing in the doorway of a bar they had laughed in together, in clothes chosen to remind him of better times. She was, without realizing it, running the script that had always worked before. Appear remorseful, evoke the good memories, wait for the stable man to stabilize everything. It was not manipulation in the deliberate sense. It was conditioning, the deeply ingrained expectation that Jamal would respond to her distress by absorbing it, the way he had always absorbed everything. The problem was that Jamal had stopped participating in that script. She crossed the room quickly and reached for him, both arms out, the hug that used to reset everything between them. He stepped back, once, quietly. Her arms fell to her sides. She sat. Psychologists who study long-term relationship breakdown point to a pattern they call devaluation cycling. One partner gradually stops perceiving the other as a full person and begins relating to them as a function, a role the other person fills, rather than a human being they chose. The partner becomes ambient, like temperature in a room, present, necessary, and completely unnoticed until it's gone. Keisha had been inside that cycle for years. She did not wake up one morning and decide to stop valuing Jamal. It happened incrementally, through 1,000 small moments of comparison and dismissal. And the more consistent and reliable Jamal was, the more invisible he became. His faithfulness read as predictability. His steadiness read as limitation. Darius was compelling to her precisely because he was unreliable. Uncertainty produces a neurological response: alertness, anticipation, the heightened focus that comes from not knowing what comes next. That response is powerful. It is also frequently mistaken for genuine feeling. Jamal produced none of that. He produced safety. And somewhere along the way, Keisha had confused safety with smallness. Jamal set his phone face up on the table and opened the folder. The bank transfer records appeared first, color-coded by date, totaled at the bottom. $65,000 across 5 months, each transaction labeled in Keisha's own handwriting through the digital memo field. Her eyes moved across the screen. The color left her face gradually, the way a tide pulls back from shore. First her forehead, then her cheeks, then the skin around her mouth going pale and still. Hotel receipts next. The Waldorf Astoria on Peachtree Road. The St. Regis Atlanta downtown. 2 nights at the W Hotel in Buckhead. All time-stamped. all charged to the joint credit card she had used freely, assuming he never reviewed the statements. He had reviewed every statement. He had simply, for too long, chosen not to ask questions he already sensed the answers to. The message screenshots followed, organized by month, the way evidence is organized for a site inspection, methodically, clearly, without emotional commentary. And then the photographs pulled from the family cloud account they had both trusted. Keisha's hand flew to her mouth. A single tear moved down her left cheek, then another. Her hands, folded on the table, began trembling. That fine, involuntary trembling that the body produces when it can no longer hold the gap between what a person has done and the version of themselves they prefer to believe in. "Jamal," she whispered, "please." He said nothing. He let the evidence speak for itself, the way evidence always should. "I thought you'd be home waiting," she finally said. Her voice was barely a thread. "You've always been my safe place, the stable one." Safe place, the stable one. Notice the language. Even in this moment, she was describing him not as a man she loved, but as a service he provided, a function, a fixed feature of her life, like the foundation beneath a house that only gets acknowledged when it cracks. This is the psychological center of what happened to Jamal Thompson across 8 years of marriage. He was never fully perceived as a person with limits. He was perceived as a guarantee. And guarantees, by definition, require no maintenance and inspire no gratitude. "The old version of me would have waited," Jamal said. His voice was low, unhurried, steady in the way that only comes from having already processed the worst of it alone. He would have taken you back, told himself it was for Marcus, and spent the next several years swallowing what you did until it became something else entirely. Keisha looked up at him. "But that version of me didn't walk out that door on his own. You sent him away, a little at a time, every time you looked at me like I was something ordinary. Every time you compared me to a man whose lifestyle was theater and called it happiness. Every time you made me feel that showing up, day after day, without drama, wasn't enough." Her crying deepened. A couple at the adjacent table glanced over briefly, then looked away. "I built for you," he said. "The way I build everything, from the foundation up, piece by piece, designed to last. You stood in the middle of everything I built and decided it wasn't exciting enough." He paused. When he spoke again, the words came out slower, each one carrying full weight. "You were my wife. The woman I drove to the hospital at 3 in the morning. The woman I stayed beside in the NICU until sunrise. That woman looked me in the eye across a candlelit table and asked for permission to leave. And then she left anyway." Here is the lesson that lives inside this moment, for anyone watching from the outside. We are taught, in ways we rarely examine, to associate excitement with value and reliability with ordinariness. But excitement is neurological. It fades. The nervous system habituates to it within months. What does not fade, what actually deepens with time, is trust. The certainty that someone will be present when things go wrong. The knowledge that the person beside you is not performing. Keisha pursued a feeling and called it living fully. She left behind the only thing that was genuinely real. For the first time since Jamal had known her, he watched real fear move across her face. Not the fear of losing comfort, not the fear of social embarrassment, the fear of irreversible loss. The specific, devastating recognition that something you dismissed as permanent was always, quietly, without announcement, a choice someone was making every single day, and that they had stopped making it. He collected his phone, stood, buttoned his jacket. "I hope it was worth it," he said, not cruelly, just truthfully. He walked out onto Edgewood Avenue into the warm April night and did not look back. Behind him, she said his name once, twice, Then nothing. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like something he had earned. What happened less than 24 hours later, at the door of Jamal's apartment just before midnight, would bring secrets into that room that nobody present was fully prepared for. What gets revealed next changes everything. At 12:57 in the morning, someone pounded on the door of the apartment in Smyrna. 3 hard knocks. A pause. 3 more. Jamal was still at the kitchen table, legal pad, cold coffee, the quiet industry of a man who had converted grief into action. He set down his pen and crossed to the door. He opened it. Keisha stood in the hallway. And here, observed from the outside, with clear eyes and some distance, what you are about to witness is not simply a woman falling apart. It is the complete collapse of a psychological architecture that was never built on anything solid. She looked like someone wrung out from the inside. Mascara in twin lines down both cheeks, her blouse misbuttoned in a way she had not noticed, hands shaking visibly under the fluorescent corridor light. She looked at him. And then she sank to her knees, right there in the hallway. "Please, Jamal," she sobbed. "Please. I'm pregnant. I can't lose everything. Please." His chest closed. One involuntary beat. Standing outside this scene, watching it unfold with the perspective that only distance provides, what you are witnessing has a name in behavioral psychology: crisis-induced vulnerability exposure. Every defense mechanism dropping at once. Not because the person is genuinely changed, but because consequences have finally arrived and there is nothing left to hide behind. Keisha was not performing. The desperation was entirely real. But real desperation is not the same thing as genuine transformation. That distinction between being scared of consequences and being truly changed by them is one the people we love most often cannot see clearly from inside the experience. It requires an outside eye. Then a voice came from inside the apartment. "She should probably tell you the whole story first." Ty stepped forward from the kitchen doorway. Beside him stood Denise Harper, family law attorney, Buckhead office, a woman who had spent 15 years navigating Georgia's marital asset statutes. She had the composed, unhurried manner of someone practiced at delivering difficult information without drama. Keisha's eyes moved from Ty to Denise, then back to Jamal. The color left her face completely. "Come inside, Keisha," Jamal said, not warmly, not coldly, simply. She stood, came in, sat on the edge of the couch. Denise opened a slim manila folder on the kitchen counter and began laying its contents out, page by page. "Over the last 5 months," Denise said, "Mrs. Thompson transferred $65,000 from joint marital accounts to Darius Washington. These transfers are fully documented and time-stamped." Keisha drew breath to speak. Denise continued. "We also recovered written communications discussing a plan to transfer partial ownership of the marital property, the home on Oglethorpe Avenue, to Mr. Washington. The language used was consistent across multiple messages. Building a new future together. I wasn't actually going to. The intent is established in writing, Keisha," Denise said, without raising her voice. "The documentation is dated." Keisha pressed both hands over her face. From an outside perspective, this is the moment worth examining carefully. Because what has just happened is not only legal exposure, it is what therapists call the collapse of the private narrative. For months, Keisha had been living inside a story she authored for herself, one in which she was the central figure, making brave, authentic choices. Darius fit that story as the man who finally recognized her fully. Jamal fit as the comfortable past she was outgrowing. Private narratives like this one are remarkably durable. They survive guilt, they survive moments of doubt. What they cannot survive is the presence of other people in the room who have read the documentation. The moment Denise Harper opened that folder, Keisha's story lost its only author. And then a third person stepped from the short hallway into the room. Mama Gloria. She wore a housecoat and slippers, silver streaked hair pulled back. The expression on her face was not fury. It was something quieter and more permanent. The settled, sorrowful look of a woman who had prayed for a different outcome and arrived, finally, at acceptance that the outcome was what it was. In close families, particularly in communities where the bonds of kinship and faith run deep, the matriarch represents something beyond authority. She is a moral witness. Her presence in that apartment was not a tactic, it was testimony. And it carried a weight that no legal document alone could replicate. Keisha could argue with paperwork. She could not argue with Mama Gloria standing in the room. Mama Gloria, I'm not here to argue with you, Mama Gloria said quietly, firmly. I'm here to say what I know. She looked at Keisha steadily, with the eyes of a woman who had loved that young woman, had prayed over her, had brought food to her hospital room when Marcus arrived early, had sat beside her at her own father's funeral. You didn't just betray my son. You were preparing to take the home my grandson sleeps in and sign it away to another man. I have known for months. I prayed every Sunday that I was reading the situation wrong. A pause. I was not wrong. Keisha broke, the kind of crying that has no performance left in it. Deep, heaving, the sound of a person reaching the bottom of something. Then Denise's voice returned to the room. There is one additional matter. The air in the apartment tightened. Mrs. Thompson is currently 12 weeks pregnant. A DNA test, completed 6 days ago at a clinic on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, confirms that the biological father is Darius Washington. Ty exhaled slowly and looked at the ceiling. Mama Gloria closed her eyes. Keisha looked at Jamal with the expression of a person watching the last available handhold disappear. Denise set one final page on the counter. We also recovered a series of messages, 31 of them over a 10-day period, in which Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Washington discussed how to manage the pregnancy if it became a complication for their plans going forward. The apartment went completely still. Keisha began shaking. That's not what I meant by those messages. I wasn't going to... Then her phone buzzed on the couch cushion beside her. She looked down at it. What happened next, in terms of pure timing, could not have been planned, and it was the thing that ended whatever remained. She turned the screen slowly so Jamal could see. Darius Washington. One final message. I'm not raising that baby. Don't contact me again. Then, blocked. Here is what needs to be said plainly, from the outside, as an observer of this entire story. Darius Washington was never a person in Keisha's life. He was a feeling, the feeling of being chosen, of being seen as more than routine, of the particular electricity that comes from uncertainty, from a relationship without the weight of real responsibility attached to it. Feelings, by their nature, are not loyal. They are not permanent. They do not pay mortgages or sit in the NICU at 3 in the morning, or coach Little League in August heat. When the feeling no longer served Darius Washington, he ended it with 11 words and a block. No conversation, no accountability. Gone. This is what Keisha traded a marriage for. Not a man with depth, not a love with roots. A season of feeling that ended the moment it required something real. Keisha slid from the couch onto the floor. She was still there, hands covering her face, shoulders shaking, when she finally looked up at Jamal. Please, she said, her voice stripped to almost nothing. Don't take my children away from me. He looked down at her for a long moment. Beneath the exhaustion, beneath the quiet fury of the last several days, beneath years of patience that had been mistaken for passivity, he felt, reaching all the way down to the bottom of it, something unexpected. Not anger, not satisfaction. Release. The specific physical relief of a man who has been carrying something far too heavy for far too long, and has finally completely set it down. "You needed one night with him," he said. His voice was just above a whisper. "I'm giving you a lifetime to understand why that was a mistake." He turned toward the door. He did not slam it. He closed it quietly, the way a man closes a chapter he has finished reading and does not intend to open again. What happened in the courtroom 5 months later would be the last scene of this story. And for Jamal, it would be the last time he ever looked backward at any of it. The divorce took 5 months. 5 months of hearings, motions, and phone calls from Keisha's extended family asking Jamal to reconsider, to be the bigger person, to think about what all of this was doing to Marcus, as though Jamal had not spent the entirety of their marriage being the bigger person, as though Marcus were not the precise reason he was fighting as hard as he was. Keisha's attorney was skilled. She came into the first mediation session at the Fulton County Courthouse composed and prepared, and spent 45 minutes arguing that Jamal had been emotionally withdrawn long before the marriage deteriorated, and that the financial transfers represented shared decisions made in the course of a mutual life. Denise Harper let her finish. Then she opened her folder. $65,000 in transfers, hotel receipts across 4 properties, time-stamped message records, audio files recovered from the family cloud, written communications planning the transfer of marital property, DNA confirmation of paternity from a third party. By the third session, Keisha's legal strategy had been substantially revised. Georgia family law does not treat the intentional draining of marital assets lightly. When one spouse deliberately redirects shared funds, funds built from the combined labor of both partners, toward a personal relationship, the courts treat it as financial harm inflicted on the other spouse. The documentation Denise had assembled was organized, thorough, and difficult to contest. The court's final determination was methodical. Primary custody of Marcus was awarded to Jamal. The West End house remained in his name. The majority of their shared assets were allocated to him, with a structured repayment order covering the transferred funds. Keisha was placed under a supervised visitation arrangement pending a family counselor's assessment. She fought the custody portion hardest. At one point during proceedings, her attorney stood before the judge and argued that Jamal had abandoned his wife, citing his departure from the marital home as evidence of instability and poor judgment. The judge looked up from his papers. Mr. Thompson left the marital residence after discovering documented evidence of a sustained extramarital relationship and $65,000 in unauthorized transfers from joint accounts, he said. That constitutes a measured response to serious marital misconduct, not instability. A brief silence followed. Keisha exhaled sharply at her table. The final hearing had the particular quality of silence that belongs only to rooms where something truly irreversible is being decided. Jamal sat beside Denise, hands folded, watching the proceedings with the focused calm of a man who had made his peace with the outcome before walking through the door. At the close of that final session, Keisha's attorney read a formal written statement from Darius Washington's legal representation. He denied paternity responsibility. He denied any agreement to provide financial support. He denied, through 3 careful paragraphs of legal language, any meaningful connection to the circumstances described in the case. The man who had spoken openly, at cookouts and networking events across Atlanta, about how Keisha had made the right choice, about how she deserved better than the life she had, could not find time to deny it in person. He sent attorneys instead. Keisha began crying at her table. Her attorney put a steady hand on her arm. Jamal did not watch for long. When the final order was entered and the session closed, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to where Keisha was still seated. He stopped a respectful distance away, not to loom over her, but because there was one thing left to say before he walked out of that building permanently. "Marriage is not a test," he said. keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear it clearly. You don't measure someone's loyalty by how much they'll absorb before they break, and then act surprised when the breaking is real. He let that settle for a moment. Keisha was my wife. She was supposed to be the person I built everything with. Instead, she became the reason I had to rebuild from scratch. And the hardest part? He glanced toward Marcus at the back of the room. I'm grateful for it now. Because what I'm building this time, I'm building it on something real. She looked up at him, eyes swollen, hands folded in her lap. I don't carry anger toward you anymore, he said, and he meant it fully. Anger is expensive. I need everything I have for Marcus. He glanced toward the back of the courtroom, where Mama Gloria sat with his son. Marcus was reading a book about dinosaurs, the thick kind with full-color photographs, completely absorbed, entirely unaware that the world around him had just been officially rearranged. I chose my son, Jamal said simply. And I chose myself. He turned and walked through the courtroom doors. Outside on Pryor Street, the afternoon light was warm and flat the way Atlanta light tends to be, indifferent to whatever happens beneath it, bright regardless. Mama Gloria came through the doors beside him, Marcus's hand in hers. Ty fell into step on the other side, hands in his jacket pockets, quieter than usual. You good? Ty asked after a moment. Jamal considered the question honestly. Yeah, he said. I really am. In the weeks that followed, word traveled the way it always does in communities built on shared history. Not loudly, but completely. Members of their church on Gordon Road quietly created distance. Friends from both families found reasons to stop calling. The social world Keisha had navigated confidently for years contracted around her, the way a room grows smaller when the lights go down. She moved back into her mother's house in College Park. Darius Washington, by all available accounts, had moved on to a new chapter before the court ink was dry on the paternity denial. The life Keisha had dismantled her marriage to build was nowhere in sight. And the man she had counted on to stay, reliable, quiet, steady, boring Jamal Thompson, was standing in the October sunlight outside the Fulton County Courthouse with his son's hand in his, walking forward, not looking back. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic moment or a clear ending. It arrives quietly, in the ordinary mornings you didn't expect to feel all right in. What Jamal found on the other side of all of this is the part of the story that stays with you longest. 6 months after the last gavel fell in Fulton County Family Court, Jamal stood in front of the house in West End with Marcus's hand in his. It was a Saturday morning in October, cool enough for a jacket, the kind of Atlanta autumn day that arrives like an apology for the long summer. The maple in the front yard had turned orange and red. The porch swing creaked the same way it always had, in the same slow rhythm it had kept for as long as either of them could remember. Marcus looked up at the house with the careful, watchful expression that children get when they are trying to read emotional weather without the vocabulary to ask about it directly. "Dad," he said quietly, "is Mom ever coming back here?" Jamal crouched down so they were eye level. This boy who had been 3 pounds in an incubator, who now came up past his father's chest and wore his Atlanta Braves cap sideways because he'd seen Ty do it and decided it was the right call. "No, son," he said gently, "but I am always going to be here, and I am never going to let you carry the kind of weight I carried for too long." Marcus nodded slowly, the way children do when they understand something they do not yet have words to name. Then he asked if they could make French toast. They went inside and made French toast. Real life, the version Jamal had not been living for years, the one he had been white-knuckling his way alongside while trying to hold everything else together, returned quietly and without ceremony. He went back to the gym. Not as punishment or compensation, simply as maintenance, the way a man tends to a tool he intends to use for a long time. 3 mornings a week before Marcus woke up, running the trails along the Chattahoochee River at sunrise while Atlanta was still gray and cool and entirely peaceful. It turned out that beneath all the suppressed grief and managed anger and accumulated exhaustion, he had genuinely missed the simple fact of taking care of himself. The side business he had been building in the margins of his marriage, residential renovation contracts, independent engineering consultation, began growing at a pace that surprised even him. Within 4 months, he had brought on 2 subcontractors and signed a commercial project in Decatur that covered half a year of expenses in a single contract. One evening, Ty called for no reason except to say he was proud. "You sound different," Ty said. "Yeah," Jamal said. "Like yourself. Like the version from before all of it." Jamal knew exactly what he meant. And then, in the unhurried, unannounced way that genuinely good things tend to arrive, he met someone. Her name was Adrienne, 40 years old, an architect who worked downtown during the week and coached youth basketball on weekends because she believed that kids needed people in their corner who were not being compensated for it. She had a laugh that started low and built slowly, and she carried the quality that Jamal had been missing for years without ever finding the right word for it. She was at peace. Not the performed peace of someone managing impressions. The deep, earned peace of a person who knew who she was and did not require external confirmation to feel settled in it. Being around her felt like sitting on a porch on a calm afternoon. Nothing demanded, nothing performed, just presence and warmth and ease. They moved slowly. Neither of them was in a hurry for anything. Marcus reported his assessment one evening with the gravity of a professional reviewer. "She helped me with my math homework. She didn't make me feel dumb when I got it wrong." He said it the way he might review a teammate, straightforward, final, affirmative. That was all Jamal needed to hear. One evening, he drove back to Ponce City Market on North Highland Avenue, the same rooftop where he had sat across from Keisha in that red dress the night everything ended. He stood at the railing and looked out over the Atlanta skyline. The lights spread wide and alive in every direction. The city doing what cities do. Continuing, indifferently and brilliantly, regardless of whatever any single person is going through beneath its lights. He stood there a long time. And the thought that settled into him, quiet, certain, without drama, was this. He had not lost everything. He had lost an illusion. The carefully maintained idea of a marriage that had stopped being a marriage long before the night at the restaurant. He had mourned it, documented it, survived it, and walked away from it with his son, his self-respect, and something he had not felt in years, the simple, uncluttered sense of being exactly who he was, without apology and without performance. He drove home. Marcus was at the kitchen table doing homework. The house smelled like the soup Mama Gloria had dropped off that afternoon. The porch light was on. Jamal stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. It was enough. It was genuinely, completely enough. Final moral. This story reminds us of something simple that we often only see clearly from the outside looking in, usually too late. Faithful people do not leave loudly. They leave the way Jamal did, quietly, methodically, with a handwritten note on the kitchen counter and a door closed gently behind them. There is no dramatic exit, just an absence that grows louder every morning. If you have a good man at your table, or if your daughter does, or your granddaughter, pay attention to the small things he does without being asked. The bill he paid without mentioning it, the errand he ran because he noticed it needed doing. Those quiet acts are not habits. They are daily choices, and choices can stop being made. Here is something practical worth doing this week. The next time someone steady and faithful shows up for you, your son, your grandson, a neighbor who checks on you every Thursday without fail, stop what you are doing. Put down the dish towel. Look at them directly and say out loud, "I see what you do, and I don't take it for granted." 6 words, 30 seconds. It costs nothing. And it means everything to a person who has spent years wondering whether anyone noticed. That is the real lesson Keisha never learned in time. Do not wait until the door closes to say it. This story was written by a human, supported by AI. It's not grand. It only hopes to gently touch your heart. That even when looked down upon or pushed aside, justice may arrive late, but never absent. And kindness will ultimately be rewarded in the most beautiful way. Production team story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life. Production team, story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.